How's it going, you crafty bunch of bakers? Welcome back to another video. Today I'll show you to make super crusty lean dough rolls. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. I know that the channel is heavy on enriched dough recipes full of eggs, butter and sugar, and plenty of recipes made with special methods like scalding and soaking, so I decided to step back a bit and make a basic lean dough for once. Some people even argue that it's not bread if it's made up of anything except flour, water, yeast and salt. For me, it's all good. I prefer breads made with various ingredients and methods. It keeps bread making interesting for me, but I welcome a lean dough once in a while. And these crusty buns turned out great. Super soft interior, crispy crust and a great flavor. So let's just get right to it. Let me show you how they're made. Starting with the ingredients. While the breads look pretty different, they're made up of the same ingredients. White bread flour, whole grain rye flour, yeast, salt, caraway seeds and water. The only differences are the amounts of water and the amounts of yeast, because one of them is cold fermented. But we'll start this video off with the room temperature recipe. And of course it starts with temperature control. My kitchen was around 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm using water that's 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The dough will warm up naturally by a couple degrees as we mix it. In a large bowl, pour in the water, add the yeast, the salt, the caraway seeds and the rye flour. And then give it all a good mix. You want to dissolve the salt completely and get rid of any lumps in the flour. A spatula will work here, but a whisk is the best tool for the job. Once everything's nicely mixed, add the final ingredient, the white bread flour. Then grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. We're aiming for a final dough temperature of around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. If your dough turned out warmer, it'll ferment more rapidly. If it's cooler, it will take longer. Adjust the fermentation times accordingly. Bulk fermentation will take around 1 hour, punctuated by a fold halfway through. Folding will build some tension in the dough, and since we are not kneading, the dough will benefit from it quite a bit. To perform the fold, dust the dough with flour, tip it out on the table with the smooth side down, flatten it out, then fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle until you reach point where you started. Then turn it smooth side up again, tighten it against the table and back in the bowl it goes. Cover it up and leave it to ferment for another 30 minutes to finish bulk fermentation. Now we can move on to dividing and pre-shaping. Dust the dough with flour, dust the scales with flour, weigh the dough and then divide it into 6 equal pieces. This set of rolls, or loaf if you can call it that, will be made up of 5 round rolls and 1 flat piece, which will be laid over the top to create that unique design. Pre-shaping goes the same way as the fold earlier. Use a bit of flour to avoid any stickage, take a piece of dough, flatten it out, then fold the edge over the middle, going around in a circle to reach point where you started. Flip it smooth side up, tighten it against the table and that's your dough ball done. Dust the dough balls with flour, cover them up, leave them to rest for 15 minutes. During this time, the gluten will relax sufficiently for us to be able to do the final shaping easily. We'll start off by shaping the 5 round rolls. And there is nothing new here. Dust dough with flour, place it on the table with the smooth side down, perform the folds going around in a circle, tighten the dough ball against the table, and finally, pick it up and pinch the seam together at the bottom. This set of buns, or loaf if you could call it that, is made up of 5 round dough balls and 1 flat disc of dough. So after shaping the first 5 pieces, grab the final one, dust it with flour, and roll it out using a rolling pin. When it comes to this flat disc of dough, there are a couple of things we could do with it. Because the 5 rolls will be arranged in a circle, there will be a hole in the middle. And we want that hole in the middle to still be there after the flat piece is laid over the 5 dough balls. So you can either do what I'm doing here by punching a hole in the middle of the disc, or you could take a knife and place some cuts in the center of the disc, so that the excess dough kind of droops down into the hole between the buns. I sure hope that made sense. If it didn't, just follow my hands. Brush the buns with water before you lay the top piece down. It will ensure that it stays in place. This next bit is optional, but you could take scissors or a knife and score the flat piece of dough in the areas where the dough balls are next to each other. This will make the dough droop down a bit, hugging the dough balls and making for a nice looking loaf. Okay, dust this beauty with some flour, cover it up, leave it for the final proof, which should take around 45 to 60 minutes. During this time, preheat the oven to 210 degrees Celsius, fan on, and that is 410 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm gonna bake this bread in my Lodge combo cooker. In order to achieve crispy crust, we need steam, and one of the best ways of keeping steam in a baking chamber is by using a pan with a lid. You could also try using a spray bottle with water. I didn't do that for this recipe because I decided to stencil the loaf. If I sprayed it down with water right now, the skulls would disappear. Okay, grab the hot pan out of the oven, place it somewhere where it won't cause an accident, remove the lid, and then carefully place the bread in the pan. Then cover it up and pop it in the oven. This is a small recipe, so it won't take very long. We'll bake the bread for 15 minutes with the lid on, then we'll take it out of the oven, remove the lid, and place the bread back into the oven for another 5 to 8 minutes of baking. Of course, it very much depends on your oven. It may take longer, it may take less time. Just keep an eye on the crust. If it looks done, it most likely is done. If you're happy with the color, pull it out of the oven. And I'm pretty happy with this one. It looks fantastic. But let's leave this on the side and move on to the next recipe. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, both recipes are made with the same ingredients. The only difference is the amount of yeast and the amount of water. Because this dough is cold fermented, it requires less yeast. Also, because it will spend so much time fermenting, the flour will absorb the water a lot better. So in order to not end up with a tight dough, we use more water. Also, as a side effect, the increased hydration will contribute to the crispiness of the crust. As per usual with my cold fermented recipes, I mixed up the dough, placed it in the fridge to cool down for 30 minutes, and I pulled it out to give it a fold. And I'm folding it up in the air to avoid making a mess on the table. Once it's folded, I placed it back into the fridge for a long cold fermentation of 18 to 24 hours. It is now the next day and the dough is puffed up beautifully. We can now weigh it, divide it and pre-shape it. Cover it up and leave it to rest for 15 minutes. After resting, we perform the final shaping, arrange the dough balls on some baking paper, cover them up and leave them to proof for 45 to 60 minutes, just as with the previous recipe. Don't forget to preheat the oven and your baking vessel. Once the dough balls are nice and big, they're ready for the oven. Because the dough balls are not stenciled, this time I'll use my spray bottle to mist them with water. While the pan with the lid is quite effective at keeping steam inside, the mass of this dough is pretty small, so there won't be that much evaporation. And I think spraying it with water and cooking it under the lid will make the crust extra crispy. Of course, there is such a thing as too much steam, in which case you can end up with a crust that is too soft, but you have to go quite overboard for that to happen. Okay, these bad boys were in the oven for 15 minutes, we removed the lid and baked them for 10 more minutes. The individual rolls in this recipe are larger, that's why I baked them for longer. I was also aiming for a deeper crust color, but there you have it, 2 basic crusty roll recipes. The cold fermented one is definitely the winner when it comes to crustiness. Few things are needed for a crispy crust. A relatively high hydration, a high temperature bake with plenty of steam, and ideally a lean dough. Cold fermented bread usually turns out more crusty too, but you know, each to their own, and I enjoyed both of these breads. Check out some more easy recipes in the basic dough playlist, and find plenty of cold fermented recipes in the cold fermentation playlist. But that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.